Big God, the Trickster, Brushman, Cannibal, Dangerous Being, Devil of the Forest, Giants, the Giant, the Frightener, the Big Man, the Tree Men, the Gamekeeper, the Masked Being, Tall Man, the Stone Man, Bushman, the Cannibal Demon, Stone Coats, Stone Giants, Big Person, Big Man with Little Hat, Otter Man, Wood Man, Big Elder Brother, Owl Woman Monster, Wild Woman of the Woods, Wicked Cannibal, Wild Man of the Woods, the Five Brothers, Spirit Spear, One who runs and hides, Spirit hidden by the woods, Big People, Tall Burnt Hair, Wild Man, and Sasquatch. Those are the translations of the various Native American tribes which I could find. There are many other untranslated from other various tribes which all had the same denominator, Bigfoot. Chitonka, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, the older brother of the woods in Western Sioux language. This is a story partly about him and partly about the traditions for becoming a man in the one particular offshoot tribe of the Lakota Sioux Nation. Wisitegulega was only part of his name. I couldn't pronounce probably even that part of it correctly, and I'm not even going to try the rest, but for the story we will call him Teta. His true name is born of the Sioux Nation, which describes the mother raccoon. In this case, it is in respect to the caution and wisdom she shows when teaching her young how to do something dangerous such as climbing trees. When such an endeavor is approached, she takes them to trees overhanging water so if they fall, it doesn't hurt them. Teta had reached the age of proving himself to be worthy of the title of warrior, and this is his story. So this story takes place before the time when the blue coat soldiers were known. This is when the Native Americans controlled the land. During that stretch of history, there existed few tribes more powerful than the Sioux Nation. It was summer when the older young adults were being married, and the young males were to go out into the wilderness and visit a particular mountain lake which turned into a stream which was said to have a fish that could not be caught in the waterways found at the lower levels of the elevation. This particular destination was said to be guarded by Chitonka, or Big Elder Brother, the Lakota Sioux word for Bigfoot. He would be given a fishing kit created by his father, or the one in the tribe who handled that area of life concerning the young male. It was unknown if his father was living at the time of this story. There were several tasks he would have to accomplish before becoming a warrior, but none were more challenging than the one which proved bravery. He would enter the area where the fish could be found most abundantly and catch one of the fish and bring it back as a present to the chief. This must be done while avoiding Chitonka's anger for entering his territory. The best way to accomplish that was said to be undetected, so that was what Teta fully intended to do. It would require great bravery to enter the land of the Chitonka. His people avoided the area with the same dedication as if it were a burial ground. According to tribal history, the Chitonka slept during the day and was everywhere yet nowhere when the light fell absent. True enough, his people saw the Chitonka as being a caretaker of the wilderness, an older sibling dedicated to the survival of nature and the king of the nighttime, but also one who enjoyed his privacy. The forest was for the Sioux to explore and use as a hunting ground during the daytime hours, but when it became night, the place belonged to another, a force no warrior wanted to encounter because they stood little chance at battle. Truth be told, the majority of the members of the tribe had never encountered the Chitonka, but of course they had all heard of it and greatly respected the legend. Another truth was that most of the boys went and fished in the lower waters and just stayed until they caught the fish which they were supposed to catch in the higher elevations. The fish was available in the lower elevations. Only legend had it restrained to living in the upper regions. Teta was aware of this, but chose to ignore the safe route. He wanted to be able to say he had actually done the deed required to become a warrior. So when it was his time, he left his home and headed for the high country. And after several days of climbing and spending the nights without the comfort of a blanket or the safety of a teepee, he arrived at the place where he was supposed to catch his fish. He arrived mid-morning, and it was as was his intention. The legends claimed that the Chetonka was a day sleeper. Ted firmly planned on getting his fish and getting out of there before the Chetonka was ever awake to know he had been there. Waking that morning, Ted immediately felt the spirits were with him because there was almost no wind. His scent wouldn't be picked up by the Chetonka, at least not easily. It was a bright, beautiful day. The water was clear and cold as anyone would expect it to be in such higher elevations. Ted immediately found an agreeable spot to start his fishing. As Ted was bringing in his first fish, he also became aware there was something moving in the forest just beyond his location. It was being very quiet, and he wouldn't have known if he didn't just happen to look behind him while he was bringing in the fish. His father had taught him the times you are most likely to be ambushed are the times when it would seem obvious you were busy doing something else, and those times were when he must remember to watch his back. Ted had lived up to the meaning of his slang-termed name by being cautious and doing what his father had told him. When he turned around and looked behind him, he continued to hear nothing moving in the forest, but his quick turnaround had caused something to go diving into the brush, and their action had left a few things waving in an atmosphere where there was no wind to have caused them to act in such a fashion. Ted came to the realization that perhaps Chetonka was not the daytime sleeper his people had thought. Of course, he had not seen anything to conclude it was the big-footed older brother of nature, but also figured if it had been a bear, it would have come out after him. And if it was a deer or other similar prey creature, he would have heard it as it exited through the forest. Whatever was out there had not left. The fact it had not shown itself was most concerning. There was, of course, the outside chance it was a lion, but they hunted at night. Mid-morning, coming upon noon, was their sleepy time. No, it didn't stand to reason what was out there was a mountain lion. He did know two things. It was very quick, and it was either smart or did not want to be seen, or probably both. Which, if that were the case, then it was likely the Chetonka. Ted felt fear rise up in him, and he fought off the desire to just go running through the forest in a mad race to get home. Just what they want you to do. He could hear his father saying, if they don't show themselves but make themselves known, then they are trying to drive you into an ambush. Hold your ground and think things through. Which is exactly what Ted did. And then he got an idea. He asked himself, why was the Chetonka angry that someone would come and fish in his waters? The answer was so simple. Ted rebaited to catch more fish and did not leave his spot he had chose to fish. The spot was excellent, and in no time he had caught several of the prized aquatic creatures. The day was now mid-afternoon. Ted wanted desperately to be out of the area before darkness set in. He used some of the local vines to create two separate carriers for the fish. Two of them he set aside to keep, while the remaining four he stretched out on a line between two trees so they were very apparent. Next, he took his two and he left everything else behind and began running for home. Ted was fast, and never did he feel more motivated to cover ground than on that afternoon, and he raced through the shadows from tall trees and into bright meadows that nearly caused him to topple from their radiance. Several times when Ted had stopped to catch his breath, he heard something moving in the forest not far off from his location, but he never saw anything. The combination of fear and knowing he was so close to accomplishing his goal, the right way no less, was very motivating. And in youth, he was not in any one spot for very long. He also enjoyed the fact that the race was downhill at almost every aspect. Now, once when coming upon the stream, he heard something splashing through it ahead of him, which sounded big, likely just an elk or maybe a black bear. But still, he gave pause for a few minutes and let whatever it was have time to go ahead of him in case they were on the same route. Though if he were completely truthful with himself, he would have to have admitted he was afraid of running into the Chetonka. When Teddy came to the stream, he did in fact see huge prints which could only have belonged to the Chetonka. He was even more on guard than ever, but at the same time also more motivated to rush his way through the forest and return to the safety of his encampment. Onward Tedder raced through the fauna and the boulders, fallen trees, etc. Finally, he found himself once again rushing out into the blinding light of an open meadow. The soon-to-begin setting sun was at an especially lethal angle from the horizon, so it left him completely blinded for his first 4 or 5 strides into the open grassland. When he could finally make out what was in front of him, it was an immediate reason for shock and stop. His strides into the meadow stopped abruptly because ahead of him was a very sizable brown bear. Some call them grizzly. Eventually, these bears would become extinct in the lower 48 states, but at the time of this tale, they were still very much alive and found in several of the northern states. Tedda was busted. Perhaps the bear had been hunting him, and perhaps he had just run into the wrong meadow at the wrong time, but either way, he was just about half a football field's distance from the bear and holding 2 very smelly fish, something which would get any bear's attention. Tedda swung one of the fish in the direction of the coming bear. It was not running, but it was definitely moving toward him. He hoped the fish would be an ample payment to pass. Next, he began moving away from the big creature, but did not run. He kept looking over his shoulder as he made his way toward the tree line that would again at least give some protection from the big beast. The bear stopped and sniffed the fish, and next it began eating, which was Tedda's signal to run. Once again he raced through the meadow and into the cover of the tree line. He glanced back one last time before disappearing into the forest and saw the bear was again moving in his direction. He left envisioning the big bear starting to run after him, which was even more motivation to race through the wilderness. Then, back behind him, he heard the loudest, scariest roar he had ever heard and claimed to ever hear in all of his years before passing away. He said it was the roar of the Cheetonka. He did not see anything, but he concluded the Cheetonka had found the gifts he had left and had decided to watch over him as he left the forest. And when he came upon the big bear, as it had raced to enter the tree line where Tedda had gone, he envisioned the Cheetonka appearing from the trees. The bear coming to a sliding halt, and then Cheetonka letting go that ear-splitting roar, which Tedda felt confident had sent the bear in another direction. That isn't the end of the story, however, though we are near it. Tedda continued to race away from the area, down the mountain toward where his people were camped. He slept when it became too dark to see to go on, and was woke several times because of the noises in the darkness, but was never assaulted. Admittedly, he was terrified every time the sun fell away from the sky because the night held so many frightening possibilities. Naturally, he would not have admitted to his fear to anyone else, but that didn't help him much in his current circumstance. The third and final night of his race home, which meant it was his 6th night away from home, Tedda once again had gained the attention of a bear. He wasn't sure what kind, but he was pretty sure that he had become stalked, likely due to the fish he was carrying, which frankly had become to stink something awful. On top of all his other concerns, he was wondering if the chief was going to find his gift as being a welcome one. He lacked the imagination as to see how. He never heard it, but he felt like there was something out there in the darkness that third night which was keeping the bear at a distance. He based it on the fact that several times he heard something start rushing through the brush, granted from a distance, but he thought it was coming at him, and then it was stopped abruptly, and he heard it and then moving away, but at a slower pace than it was sounded when it was coming at him. What had discouraged it? The Cheetonka? He got his answer that next day as he left the mountain and followed the river to where his family was still camped. Just as he was about to jump over a ravine, which would have seriously hurt him if he had failed to make the jump, he remembered what his father had told him, and quickly turned around to look behind, and he was rewarded with the glance of the Cheetonka. It was as grand as the legends foretold. He saw a huge creature twice his height, covered in brown fur and muscles bulging under it. The closest he could offer as a description was to look at the muscles on horses. He said they were that distinct, and even under the fur, it had deep-set eyes that were as black as the night, and it was known to thrive in. He never saw its teeth, and it never made a sound. It quickly disappeared into the forest, and Teddy took that as his cue to make his jump across the divide, and he suspected that was his departure from the protection of the Cheetonka. It is true that most people in today's society would have perhaps had PTSD from such an encounter with the Sasquatch, but you must understand that the connection between the people and the Sasquatch to the Lakota people, the Bigfoot was, yes, something to fear, but mostly it was to be respected. Most likely that particular hazing into manhood was done without the knowledge that they were sending their young men into an actual Sasquatch living area. At least that is the thoughts of those nearest to the matter which were available to speak. The end of the story is that Teddy did in fact make it back to his family, and did offer the fish to the chief, which was the joke of the encampment for some time after. On a side note, it put a whole new pressure on the boys which came after him, because the fact he arrived with a fish in such stinky condition proved the boys before him had likely not gone such a distance to get their fish. Something nobody had considered until Teddy, because nobody had actually went that far to catch the fish before them. I was curious to know what came of the boy after his trip, but nobody seemed to have any idea. Apparently the story was told down through the generations as a fable to provide wisdom which might not resonate with today's children, but at the same time it gave important life lessons, such as when you're in a territory that isn't yours, leave an homage, because that area surely belongs to someone, and they may repay your effort to show your appreciation for being in their territory by seeing you make it through safely, especially if you are young and stupid enough to race through the forest carrying a fish which is leaving a trail a bear could follow. Thanks for visiting. Please subscribe and like. It's really appreciated. Godspeed, doll.